What's up, guys? Today I have a deck profile that I'm honestly extremely excited to bring to you guys. It is a deck that I think currently is on nobody's radar, which maybe is a little justified, but I think it brings a very different taste and flavor to this meta, to black specifically as a color. So starter deck 14 Black Luffy, its leader skill is 1 Dawn attached, all your units gain +1 cost. This goes for both during your turn and your opponent's turn. So it adds another layer of protection that so far in black and really the game in general we've only seen through Sabo. So that additional 1 cost can really go a long way in terms of protecting your board state and your units. And then the other part of his leader skill is if you have an 8 cost or more unit, this leader gains an additional 1k power continuously. That goes during your turn and your opponent's turn. So essentially kind of being that Whitebeard type of leader where you're a 6k base. And 6k base is very strong. Against most decks, that does require your opponent to attach 1k to obviously their leader, but potentially other 5k power units that they have as well. So for this deck profile, we'll go over the entire structure of the deck, and I'll really be explaining the reasoning behind every single card choice, because this is such in a strange deck. You're not going to be seeing this too often. There's not like a set sort of game plan or style for this that's really been discovered yet, but I do think for what we have here, it has a great time into black for the most part, assuming you can kind of keep pace. Some other colors you might struggle a little bit more, but we're still working out everything that can be done with this deck. And if you guys have any sort of tips on terms of what you've done with this, definitely let me know in the comments below. But for now, we'll kind of go through this, everything that I feel has been working so far for me, as well as some matchups I've played personally that this deck has performed really well in. So obviously we already went over the leader, so we'll slide that over there, and really just getting started with the deck list. So this card honestly is probably the top 3 most important card in our deck, I would say, and that is the stage, so Thousand Sunny. So the continuous skill during your turn and your opponent's turn, all your black Straw Hat crew characters gain +1 cost. So all your Straw Hats, assuming you have this on field, and 1 Dawn attached to your leader, are automatically +2 cost during your turn and your opponent's turn. So your Straw Hat units are really your most protected units in this deck. And the nice thing about this card as well is it has an on play. If you have a leader that is Straw Hat type, you can draw 1 card. So you play it, you draw 1, which means you don't go down in hand size, and you get a little bit of digging through your deck slightly. But really the protection effect and cost increase of our units is what this card is mainly here for. If you want my opinion, I think this card could just have a trigger like Ennius Lobby and just play this card. I think that would honestly make this 10,000 times better, and the consistency would shoot up a lot instead of having to play that 1 Dawn for if you do take it out of life. But this card is extremely important. We need to see this card for the main engine of the deck to even get going, because it just sets live kind of the rest of the deck in general. Next up, we do have the 2Ks of the deck. This is a very important part of the process as well, because it gets a little bit into the core and the engine that I am running for this deck. So we have 2 Surus, we have 4 one-legged toy soldier, 3 Bartolomeo, and 1 Haradas. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but it is a start deck 14 card. So we'll go left to right here. So Suru, why are we running Suru? Well, Suru is a great card. It's a 1-drop for -2 cost. It's also a 2k. So really it's just quick and easy reduction, and it's very cheap to play out. There's no reason to not run Suru. It's a great card. So Toy-Legged Soldier, this card is really good because we are running Searcher Rebecca in this deck. So 1, it is a searchable 2k in this deck along with Bartolomeo, but its skill is activate main, trash this card. We get -3 cost to one of our opponent's units. So there's a lot of combo plays that we can do with this card specifically that just really let us to get really quick and fast minus, clear our board a little bit with this guy, create a space open, and get some good minus to then KO an opponent's unit. Very good card, 2k, pretty cheap to get out on board as well, 2 costs, so not too heavy. It's just got really good utility all around. And next up for 2k is Blocker Bartolomeo. This card is really good because 1, you can pull it off of Hina, you can play it off of Gecko Moria, you can just hard play it as a blocker, and it's just a good card that you can recycle, fair blocker. There's not really too much going wrong with this card, and it just provides a lot of utility. Now, Haradas, this card, honestly, I really like this card personally. It's out of 1 of. I would put it to more if I had space, I really would. But for right now, 1 of is perfectly fine because you don't need to see it, but if you do see it, it really helps propel your game plan throughout. Its skill is activate main, rest this unit. You can give one of your Straw Hat characters, black specifically, +2 cost. And then if you have a cost 8 or more unit on the board, you can draw 1, trash 1. So the reason this card is very good is in some instances, it allows us to just propel one of our units to that 8 cost level without having to use additional Dawn or additional methods to increase that. So it can become a very quick +2 so that our leader can be 6k, one of our units can be 8 costs minimum, and really be protected from that point on. And the draw one, trash one is very nice because it starts getting our filter going a little bit, building up the trash a little bit, as well as, you know, finding some pieces that we may need to. And the reason it's at 1 is because if we see it, great. If not, it's not a big deal. Sometimes we do just ditch it for the 2k in hand, but if we do have that 1 extra Dawn, which in this deck sometimes you do, just based off how your plays work, you can just play it down, use its skill. If your opponent doesn't clear it off the board, you have an additional +2k or +2 cost for the rest of the game. And I don't think the opponent in my games that I've played it have usually realized how impactful that is, because some of those times that additional +2 just is able to protect my unit for a whole turn that they're not able to deal with. So I love this card as a one-of. It's been very good. I think it's a really good card, and if you want to run more, you can, but the space is pretty tight, so it's a little bit difficult to slot it in. All right, so we'll slot all of these up here for now. And next up is truly the core of the deck. And for this, let me just make sure there. All right, so Straw Hats obviously are the main, you know, focus of the deck. This stage specifically increases black Straw Hat cards, you know, Luffy in general, you know, +1 to Straw, well, to really anything. But the Straw Hat package is really the core of this deck. So we have 4 3-cost Brook. We have 4 5-cost Sanji. We got 4 6-cost Nico Robin. We have 2 5-cost Monkey D. Luffy from the Throwback one. So what do each of these cards do? Brook obviously is on play and on attack, -1 to something, and then KO anything that is 0 cost. Brook is really nice in this deck because it's one of those consistent KOs that we do have access to. It's very recyclable through this deck as well, through other cards that we have. And with the stage and Luffy on board, it becomes a 5-cost unit. Having to clear a 5-cost, assuming you're against black, is not exactly the easiest thing to do. And if we're getting a 5-cost out that is only a 3-Dom play, and we're able to protect it and keep it on board, it's gaining us so much advantage and, you know, momentum throughout the course of the game. Arguably next up, the best card in the deck is this 5/6 Sanji. So his skill is on play. If you have a character with a cost of 6 or more, KO up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less. This card is insane just playing on curve, especially if you go second, because that means he's always live. Being able to KO anything your opponent played literally the turn prior is just such a momentum swing for a couple of reasons. One, you're obviously removing your opponent's threat, but two, assuming you go second, you have stage out, you have 1 Dawn on leader skill, he's going to be a 7-cost unit going into your opponent's 7 Dawn turn. And being your opponent having to focus on removing a 7-cost unit that early, assuming they're black or even blue or even yellow, for example, for 8-drop Katakuri, their removal, most decks can't get rid of this on that follow-up turn, assuming you have gone second, you have this, you have the Dawn on lead. It's a great play. And also with other cards that we do run in terms of reduction, which we'll get into Nico Robin right now, is you can clear 10 costs with this deck extremely easily, because Nico Robin on play and on attack, if you have a character with 8 or more costs, you can reduce your opponent's cost of one character by 5. That lets you clear anything in this game in coordination with Sanji. So, well, unless you get to like beyond 10 costs, but not too much stuff can do that right now. So Nico Robin in conjunction with Sanji, you're clearing anything in the game. And Nico Robin specifically, you can have your stage +1, leader +1. Nico Robin meets that 8-cost requirement, so not only is her skill live, but your leader then becomes a 6k base. So you just gain so much momentum off of that play alone. And she's not exactly the easiest card to remove, because 1, she becomes an 8-cost, 2, she's 7k, so swinging into her with units that are smaller than her naturally, she's just a lot easier to protect. So you have a consistent -5 cost for the remainder of the game. Now, my tech choice that I really like is this Monkey D. Luffy. The main reason behind it is I wanted to fill another way to KO my opponent's units, and with black being such a prevalent, you know, color in the meta, with Gecko, with Lucci, having a card that can KO through trashing to get around, you know, Sabo's effect is extremely nice, and 4-drop for Selena. So just on attack, trash up to one of your opponent's 2 cost or less characters. It's a slightly more difficult to get them down to 2 costs, but, you know, obviously we have ways of doing it because we run Brook, so we can get things down if we need to. And Nico Robin's a great card to reduce, like we just talked about. So this card, it's not a 4 because we don't need to see it all the time, but it's a Straw Hat, so it benefits from Thousand Sunny +1, so this will also be a 7 cost just like Sanji. So 7/6 both ways. KO's a 2 cost on attack, and if we need to build up power, we do have its secondary portion of the skill to increase attack by 1k per, 3 cards bot deck that are 4 or more. So this card is great, honestly, in my opinion. It fits that sort of middle spot if we do need it to, where if we don't have Sanji, but we can set him up for the follow-up turn and kind of be, on our way and okay in that regard. All right, so next up is the second core of the deck. We are kind of running 2 cores. We have the Strawhat Core, and now we are going into the Dressrosa Core. So we have our Searcher Rebecca, we have Blocker Rebecca, 5-drop Sabo, as well as 7-drop Luffy. So we'll change these up, slide them around. Okay, so going over the cards that are here. Obviously, Searcher Rebecca, 1 for 2. It's very similar to Spandom. For her, look at top 3 cards, choose 1 Dressrosa that isn't Rebecca, and then pick it, and then the other 2 cards go to the trash. The real unfortunate thing is obviously this Rebecca is not searchable off of this Rebecca, which sometimes that kind of really hurts because you would just love to get 4-drop Rebecca off of it. So our main targets for this Rebecca are Sabo, Toy-Legged Soldier, and Bartolomeo. If you need to grab this, if you find it off of that, great, but we'll touch on him in a bit. He's really there for other reasons. But yeah, so we got our main targets off this Rebecca. So she's really there to, 1, help build our trash so we can start getting more cards in our trash and start seeing more pieces just throughout the course of the deck and throughout the course of the game. 4-drop Blocker Rebecca, we don't really have to speak on it too much. Crazy card, so much value. Just recursion on recursion on recursion, whether that is bringing back Bartolomeo to hand or Brook to hand, even, any of our 5 costs. Sometimes you want to recur a Sabo, a Sanji. Sometimes I've even recurred a Nico Robin to just get that card back into hand so I can have consistent minus throughout the game. This card is insane value. It just really does so much. And the crazy thing, because we are running Luffy as our leader, is Rebecca is a 5-costed blocker in this deck. That might not sound super crazy, but when you compare it to those moments where your opponent plays Rebecca, assuming they're, let's say it's like a Lucci mirror, and, obviously stage is no longer a factor, but it's not too hard to get 4-cost units out of the game in this game right now. There's a fair amount of reduction across the board, and for other colors, there's a fair amount of removal around 4 costs specifically. So because our Rebecca becomes a 5-cost unit, it's a lot harder for them to clear what would be a normally easy blocker to clear. So, I've played a couple games against Perona specifically. Perona's been getting some hype recently, and against this card against Perona, they no longer just have a free rest on it. They can't use both the leader skills. They have to choose one. So Rebecca just gets so much more value in those types of matchups because she's 5 costs in this deck. And jumping on that a little bit more is Sabo. Sabo is obviously great into any removal-based matchups that are KO, so he protects our board. Sometimes the cycle that he provides in this deck is really just greater than anything because we don't have really too much of a draw engine in this deck. Yeah, we have Rebecca that can cycle a couple cards here and there, and Thousand Sunny when we play it, we draw, but we don't have like truly great cycling card finding ability because our leader skill doesn't mill or anything like that, like Lucci or Moria. So Sabo is really good for that aspect, that draw 2, trash 2, get some cards in our trash, get some cards in our hand to start filtering a bit, and his protection skill is great. And obviously in this deck, Sabo is a 6-costed blocker. So against black, yet again, it becomes that much more difficult to remove. Blue is a little bit weirder because, they have that one event that can KO or bottom deck 2 6-cost units at once, so it can't quite get around that, but we do have other ways in this deck to increase cost. So if you do need to protect some of your units that might not be a Straw Hat and get up to that 7-cost mark, you can. It is possible. So Sabo, great blocker, great into black matchups, and really just a good card in general for that cycle and stuff like that. Now, 7-drop 7K Luffy. This card, I played Rebecca back in the day a little bit, and this card, honestly, it's just a fun card. It's a cool card, looks awesome. And in this deck, the main reason we run him is 1, he's a Straw Hat, 2, he's a 7-cost Straw Hat, and 3, sometimes he can just really blitz your opponent out the game without them being prepared for it. Let's assume you go second, you play him for 7, whether you have this on board or not, you can just give 1 Dawn to lead, he becomes an 8-cost, bam, you're a 6k lead. And now you have a unit that can threaten lethal, but mainly can also threaten your opponents because he does have his main skill of he can attack active characters. There was a game I played against Enel where he played Ace 1 turn. I have this on board already. He swings with it, and he kept his 8-drop Katakuri standing. You load up Dawn on this because prior to that I had blockers established. I wasn't risk of dying. You load up Dawn onto this, swing into his Ace, swing into the Katakuri with huge Dawn investment, and you can restand by bot decking 7 cards from your trash. He's able to clear your opponent's board and start starving out decks that normally you know, you wouldn't be able to because they wouldn't swing their units, they wouldn't tap their units. Well, he gets around that. And it's honestly, it's a card that hasn't been in the meta for really aside from one set and set 4. So I don't think a lot of people would expect to be having to worry about this card. Building up your trash isn't exactly the easiest thing in this deck, but that's why we do have a couple of those filter cards. Rebecca, Sabo, this card in particular as well. And it's a good way, it's a good kind of closer if we do need it to. But I have it at 2 and not greater because sometimes we don't really need to see it. Sometimes it is just kind of a win more type of card. It could become a comeback card in the sense where, let's say you're healthy life, you play this down, you know your opponent can't remove it because if you have this leader skill at live, he's a 9-costed unit. And there aren't too many decks that can clear 9-cost units super easily and super consistently. So this card is great. I think it's super cool, and I'm honestly kind of just happy more than anything that I have an opportunity to run it, which is the main purpose of this deck really in a nutshell. Is there's a lot of cool cards, it's a cool game plan that you got going on that it's a nice refresher. All right, so let's get into the remainder of the deck, and this is a bit more of some core cards that we have to offer. So we have, all right, we'll have to slide some of this stuff around. All right, let's make space there. Awesome. Okay, so what additional cards did I just add into the deck list? We have 8-drop Moria for obvious reasons. The amount of cards that you have to recur in this deck are very good because we can recur one-legged toy soldier, we can recur Suru, we can recur Bartolomeo. We could recur this if we really need to, but most often you're not really going to. Rebecca, Brooke, Kuzan. Those are the main targets that we have, and all of them have such a great function ability within this deck that you can't really go wrong. There's a lot of times where you can't just value Gecko with this deck, but you also can't just KO very easily with, you know, Gecko, Brooke in this deck. Because you can get one-legged toy soldier, let's say you have it on the field already, -3 to something, play Gecko, get Rebecca, get Brooke, you can KO 4 costs. But the reason that we run Ice Age is so that then we can KO 9 costs. So the Gecko plays in this deck are extremely good because we just have so many options, and the cards that we then play off of that, they're not easily removed because we're all constantly +1 costs. Our Gecko is no longer an 8 cost, it's a 9 cost Gecko. So against other matchups that would normally, I mean mainly black, that they could remove an 8 cost Gecko, well, they have to do one more extra move to KO a 9 cost Gecko. KOing a 9 cost Gecko is kind of ridiculous because it's just even more value. And in addition to that, we run the 1-drop event that draws 1 card, and then we give +3 cost to any of our units. So this is kind of what I was talking about when earlier, protecting our what would be a 6 cost Sabo to then become a 9 cost Sabo. So not only does our leader skill then get active because we have an 8 cost or greater unit, but Sabo's now has an extra layer of protection where it doesn't have to worry about being KO'd by our opponent because it's a 9 cost blocker. You know, you're not clearing that very easily. And obviously that 1 extra draw, you know, just kind of filter with this card is very nice. So it allows us to see some more cards. Sometimes you do just, you know, use it early because maybe you don't feel like you need to use it in this matchup or in that game in particular, so you just get the free draw for 1 Dawn, which is perfectly fine. But the other thing that's really nice is sometimes it does allow us to protect our Brook. And what I mean by that is if we have an early turn where we have a Brook on board and we have the stage, leader skill is live, we want to go to 6k early, we can use this skill on Brook, brings it up to a 6 cost unit. These two make it 8 costs. Our leader is 6k for that remainder section, and Brook isn't easily going to be removed because it's an 8 cost unit. So normally what's a card that opponents want to get rid of extremely quickly because it gains a lot of value, you know, the more it's on board, it's guaranteed sticking around for a turn as long as we're not, you know, swinging with it, which in that case, we're probably not swinging with it. So this card secretly just really raises the protection of your deck across the board. Sometimes we use it on Sanji if we need to keep it around. Sometimes we use it on Robin if we need to keep it around. Even Rebecca, you know, an 8 cost Rebecca, that's kind of crazy. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with this deck that I don't think has really been tapped into too often. And then rounding out the rest of the list is 4-drop Kuzan. So we'll kind of slide this into the front here because I love 4-drop Kuzan in this deck. You don't have, you know, many turn 2 plays in this deck, assuming you go second. Second is the ideal curve for this deck that I find, just because it lets us do a lot more plays very easily. So playing, you know, Kuzan on your second turn for 4 Dawn, great play. You know, you set it up for later. And assuming they don't remove it right away, well, guess what? On your next turn, where you're 6 Dawn, you attach 1 to lead, you play a Sanji, remove something of your opponent's board, but guess what? Your Kuzan is now 5 cost going into your opponent's next turn. So you have a 5 cost Kuzan on board, a 7 cost Sanji on board, assuming you have stage. Kuzan's not easily getting removed in that sense anymore. It's a 5 cost. It's going to require even more investment from your opponent to remove it. And a Kuzan that can't be removed easily is really your opponent's biggest threat. -4 cost consistently on attack. It can be recurred off of Gecko Moria, so you can have it continuously gaining value for you. So I love Kuzan in this deck. I might even up it to more if I can find the slots, but honestly, everything is kind of in a good spot here. So I think Kuzan's great. It allows you to combo even more with Brook to KO high-costed units, allows you to easily combo with Sanji. You know, you swing once with this, you're KOing a 9-costed unit basically for free. So it's got so much value in this deck. I think there aren't too many moving pieces that I would interchange here. Maybe I would like increase Suru by 1 more. You could maybe cut this, but I do think this card has value. Every single card here has, you know, a lot of potential to be good. The deck flows pretty consistently as long as you can see Stage and a Sabo, I would say, just to kind of get that card draw going, that filter going a little bit. In terms of kind of what your plays are, obviously, ideally you go second. You see this early. If you see this early, great. Dawn 4, sometimes you just swing 9 with lead, play the Kuzan or play the Brook. Those are all kind of fine. And then your 6 Dawn curve or your 5 Dawn curve is really kind of a, you know, one of the more important turns. You really would love to see a Sanji or a Luffy or a Sabo. So we have 10 5-cost units in this deck, so that middle kind of style of the game, we have a lot of options depending on what we need to address in the moment. You could even play a Kuzan in that moment just to set it up a little bit further. And then really on 6 Dawn, we don't want to play Robin, is what I find. I would much rather play one of our 5-cost units, because Robin just being a 6-cost, your opponent really will try to clear this thing pretty consistently. And I would just rather play it on my 8 Dawn turn and just have it become an 8-cost unit, so that way it has a higher level of protection. My opponent can't swing into it at that point, and we become a 6k leader. Very rarely do I play Gecko on 8 Dawn. It's really there for those turns that are 9 or 10 Dawn, 9 if we go first, obviously, because that way we can also have our leader live. Gecko becomes a 9-cost at that point, our leader 6k base, so we just have some more protection consistently throughout. So really on your 8 Dawn turn, I would say your plays are 7-drop Luffy, 6-drop Robin, or any kind of combination of Sabo, Sanji, maybe a Rebecca play with a Brook, kind of just depending on that. But there are a lot of options with this deck. I've been having a ton of fun with it. You really do have a good matchup into most black matchups, like Lucci, Gecko Moria. I find very fun because it you see your Lucci opponent stumped on like what to do. So I think it's extremely fun. I've played against Perona as well, like I mentioned earlier. It honestly felt great into that matchup because they really want to abuse their leader skill, and your leader skill, I don't want to say directly counters them, but because they don't have the freedom over 4-cost units throughout the game, because 4-cost units in our deck are really 5-cost units, it really takes off some of that pressure, and you're just able to build a lot of resources because, you know, we have really good removal against them. We have geckos that are 9-drop geckos against them. We have trashing with this card, so it just goes very well. And Brook, especially in that matchup, is a 5-cost unit. It's not a 3-cost unit, so they can't really deal with that. I've played against Enel, and the strategy against Enel is very similar to pretty much all other black matchups that, you know, I've played Gecko against, that played Lucci against Enel, and you really just starve them out of resources. And you have an ace in the hole against Enel because you can starve them even more out of resources. You don't even have to attack their life. You just go play this unit, clear their board, and, you know, you're in a great spot. Bonnie is a little bit interesting. Green is an interesting one because they're such top end heavy, but, you know, I do think in terms of what you can do, we have good options against Basil Hawkins with this deck because we run Nightmare Luffy, because we run Brook. Those are both on attacking KOs, which is extremely effective against Hawkins, assuming everything other characters on your board are rested, but you just have to make them the last attack in the sequence, assuming your Bonnie opponent doesn't rest them. Which they could, which does suck, but like obviously, you know, you have to take into account for that depending on the situation. So green, I think, is definitely winnable. You kind of just do black things, build resources, don't let them build a board, and, you know, kind of just maintain control. Blue, Boa, and Dofi are probably the weirdest ones that I find. You can kind of keep the play style a little bit the same, but Dofi especially just gets wide super quickly, but you can reach a stable point with this deck because you have a KO that's live against pretty much, you know, any other 4-drops that they do have with Sanji, which is really nice. So that on curve removal is extremely helpful, and building resources with Gecko is great. And because this deck, we do have consistent +1 and sometimes +2 across any of the units on our board, they can't use that 7-cost event to remove some of our units as easily, because most of our units throughout the course of the game are going to be at that 7 and higher cost level. So they don't get that free, you know, -2 off our board as easily. But it is still definitely a bit of a weird matchup. But the other thing that's really nice with this leader is we're a 5 life leader. So we are naturally a little bit more bulky, a little bit more tanky. And we are a 6k leader as well. So when Dofi floods a board of 5k units, assuming they don't see Edward Weevil, we pray they don't see Edward Weevil. But yeah, that requires a 1 Don more investment every single time. And that sometimes that's just all you need, just that extra layer of defense, you know, that extra 1k that you become is, you know, saving you a card minimum once per turn. So it's really good. I haven't played against any red matchups with this deck, but red does have just kind of a bad matchup right now into most black decks, unless they can just, you know, shotgun you out the game with enough rush units. So that's kind of the idea behind the core of the deck. And black yellow Luffy, I've played against that I think twice with this deck, and it worked extremely well in my favor. I can't really remember what, you know, brought about the success with it. I think it was mainly the fact that I was able to establish Nightmare Luffy against them, and their Sabos at that point aren't getting value for them as easily. You know, we're just able to trash the Sabos, and their 5-cost Luffy that removes, you know, 4 costs or less, well, guess what? Kuzan's staying on board, Brook's staying on board. They're not removing them as easily. Rebecca is staying on board, so what normally is not a great card in that matchup sometimes becomes even more valuable for us. So I didn't really struggle with the Black Luffy matchup. You know, we're able to build hand. We don't have to swing at their life. You know, we can just start building board, establish this card into that matchup is very insane, because one, it lets us clear their geckos easily, clears their 5-drop, you know, trash from life Luffy very easily. And if we need to, well, we can just go for game by going 17-17. There's like no decks that are surviving that, assuming they have no blockers, no life, right? So we got a lot of options. I think this deck is extremely fun right now. Let me know what you guys think. If you have any kind of questions, definitely let me know in the comments, because this is a very unique deck right now. I'm definitely having gameplay come out for this. I've already recorded a couple games on the sim with this deck, and we'll be able to kind of go through everything, all the plays that we're doing, because it's extremely unique. It's extremely fun. I recommend you guys test this deck out. It's a good way to kind of close out the 7.5 going into 08. You know, I've been having fun with it the past, like, you know, week-ish. So I would recommend you guys pick it up. And I do think there is a world that this deck actually becomes better in 08. 08's kind of looking a little weird right now to me in terms of what's truly just going to take over the meta. I don't know if there's any single deck that really will. And one version I'm thinking about going into 08 is sort of an Animal Kingdom type package build, because, you know, you have the Jack, which becomes an 11 cost, which becomes a 12 cost with our lead, and you KO 3 cost or less with that card. You have the 9-drop Kaido, which I think is a great card. So there's definitely some more packages that we can mess around with going into 08. So I think what is a leader that's definitely slept on and not even given a second glance has some cool options. I think it's a super fun deck. I think it is more viable than really anybody's giving it credit for. I think you have a lot of utility. This core down here is a lot more aggressive than I think people would understand, and a lot more oppressive because of the remove that you come with this card. Like, this card is honestly just a better 6-7 Sakazuki. It really is, because it's a 7-6 Sakazuki where you don't have to discard an additional card. So yeah, I think a lot of stuff's going well with this deck. Let me know anything in the comments that you guys, you know, have questions about. Expected gameplay video hopefully coming over the next couple of days. And yeah, I appreciate all the love on the videos. The videos I've been doing honestly have been insane in terms of the support behind them, so I definitely appreciate it. And yeah, we'll stay tuned for the next one, and we'll catch you guys later.